For almost a century and a half, successive Canadian prime ministers have essentially and overwhelmingly stocked our Senate with supporters they hoped would be loyal to their party and agenda. Yes, there were exceptions, but in the main, that's how it worked. That, combined with the too often bad behavior of some senators, has resulted in a view of the Senate as a completely disreputable institution and prompted Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to change how senators are appointed and who now gets in. That new system has been in place for just over a year now, so we thought we'd check in to see how it's going. To do that, we welcome Senator Peter Harder, government leader in the Senate, appointed by Justin Trudeau a year ago. Senator Kim Pate, appointed by Justin Trudeau 3 months ago. Senator Art Eggleton, appointed by Paul Martin 12 years ago. And Senator Ann Cools, the first black woman senator in North American history. Prime Minister Trudeau appointed her 33 years ago. And of course, that's the other Prime Minister Trudeau, the current PM's father, Pierre.
Yes.
Senators all, welcome to TVO. It's good to have you two back again. And you two, I think, here for the first time. Long overdue.
In a while.
In a while, anyway, we'll say that.
Yes.
I want to do two things off the top here. Number one, in the interest of full disclosure, I want to point out that I have a son who works for the Senate of Canada. He doesn't work for any one of you in particular, but for the institution. And we put that out there.
He does a great job.
As his dad, I'm delighted to hear that. Okay. Second thing is, we want to just remind everybody how the new rules of the road work in the Senate. So Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up this fact file and talk about how new Senate appointees happen. New Senate candidates are vetted and recommended by a nonpartisan committee of 5 members. There's 3 federal and 2 provincial appointees. The PM still appoints the senators, but only from that list of candidates approved by the special committee. New senators are not officially affiliated with any political party. And former Liberal senators, like Art Eggleton, no longer are part of the Liberal Parliamentary Caucus. And if we look in the standings of the Senate right now, you've got 39 members of the Conservative Party, 34 independent senators appointed under the new rules, 19 so-called independent Liberals, 8 non-affiliated, and 5 vacancies. So those are the rules of the road for the new Senate that's been in place for just over a year. And I want to ask Senator Harder, in your view, generally speaking, how's it going?
I think it's working pretty well. It's a progress that the Senate is undertaking towards a less partisan, more independent, accountable, transparent, and complementary body to the House of Commons. And I would say that we're well on our way to achieving that.
Let's find out a little bit more about the newest among you. Why did you want to be a senator to begin with?
Well, it took a while for some people who nominated me to convince me. But when I was researching and saw that, in fact, we were looking at some nonpartisan approaches to really looking at legislation and leadership in the country, that was what attracted me to it.
What did you think you could contribute?
Well, I thought in terms of the work I'd been doing and for the past 35 years, I thought I could bring that expertise, but I also thought I could learn a lot from colleagues like the 3 who are here, but also many more in the Senate about other areas, and learn from that, but also take some leadership.
We should just point out the work you've been doing for 35 years is basically representing the interests of some of the most marginalized people, mostly women, I think, in our society. Did you think that by becoming a senator, you could put those issues more on the country's agenda?
Certainly it was one of my hopes, because the last senator who actually focused on some of these issues was Senator Hastings, and Senator Earl Hastings died while he was still more than 20 years ago now, while he was still sitting in the Senate. And so, yes, that was very much uppermost on my mind.
Now, you've only been there for 3 months, but you know, before you got to the Senate, you had a pretty good idea what Canadians thought about the Senate. Mm-hmm. Is it as bad as they thought?
Well, actually, as I was being appointed, the day after the announcement went out, my neighbor asked me, I was out and we were shoveling snow, and said, what do I have to call you now? And I said, same thing you've always called me, Kim. He goes, I hate the Senate. And I thought, well, okay, well, hopefully that will change over time, that will, with some of the greater transparency, with more information about what's happening in the Senate, hopefully people's views will change.
I want to bring the former mayor of Toronto, the longest serving mayor of Toronto ever, into our conversation now. You had a political career that was filled with partisan politics after that. You were at least a couple of decades as a member of parliament, member of a federal cabinet. I want to know what your view was when you first heard that you, a loyal Liberal, was being kicked out of Justin Trudeau's caucus along with all the other liberally appointed senators.
Well, it was a shock, certainly at the time. But I think we picked up the pieces and quickly adapted to the new reality. And it was the best move to make. The Senate has never been better in terms of being able to really review legislation. Sober second thought, as it's frequently called. It is much more a reality today than it has been for a long time. And so I think it turned out to be the right thing to do.
One of the observations some have made, though, is that whereas you used to get weekly access at a caucus meeting to the prime, he wasn't the prime minister at the time he threw you out, but he is now, that prime minister, all those cabinet ministers, you used to get at least a weekly session with them in the caucus meeting. You don't have that now.
But it operates like a team sport, and you're expected to be part of the team. And then I think that what that does is erode independence. And the Senate chamber was intended to be independent, and I think the people of this country want the Senate to be less partisan and more independent, and that's what we're now giving it.
Is it more like city council, the way you started your political career?
Oddly enough, the sixth largest government in this country is city council, and it operates without a political party system per se. And 45 people manage to make decisions and keep this city moving forward. So the Senate may end up one day looking like that. We don't know. We're in a transformation. We don't know what the end result is going to be, but so far it's looking very good.
Senator Coles, I wanted you here because I don't think anybody's had more time in the Senate currently than you.
That's correct.
You're number one.
Yes, that is quite true.
So you've had a lot of experience with the way it used to run, and as much as anybody, under the new rules. How do you think it's working out?
Well, I think the potential is there, but my judgment is out. I'm holding my judgment.
How come?
Because I have still to be shown how coming to agreement will be mobilized. Political parties came into existence as a way of mobilizing support within the houses based on principles and to do away with private interests. So you must remember, I look at life from a different place. I have always been independent, very, very, very independent. Even when I was a Liberal, I was an independent. And independence is not the same thing as partisanship. The problems that you allude to were somewhat novel in the Senate. We had a period of time in the Senate where we saw abuse of power by party leaders. That is not to be confused with the parties. That is to be attributed to exactly what it was, abuse of power.
So that was not an institutional problem so much as a personal problem.
That was a problem of members not providing enough checks and balances on their leaders.
So do you think this is throwing out the baby with the bathwater?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying to you, when you replace a system that did work and worked very well for a long time, but then ran into some snags and a few problems, you have to reserve a period of time to see how right you were and to discern the real improvement, if there is a real improvement, rather than just a feeling of elation because there's been change. Change has a way of bringing a sense of relief and a sense of elation. But I am saying it is still too early to tell.
Jury's still out.
But I think we've broken the cycle. Okay, it is leadership. It is a bit of the institution as well, the way it has been performed in terms of the political party grips. And we're getting out of that political party grip now. And I think this has been able to break that cycle and start us on a new path.
Senator Harder?
I repeat it. It was not the party or the partisanship that was the problem. It was abuse of power. And I saw power abused on a daily basis.
By whom?
Well.
You want to name names?
Well, I could name names, but I think it's better not to.
All right, Senator
It's
Harder,
always better not
what
to.
would you say to Senator Coles to try to bring her over?
Oh, he has me over. I support him all the time.
I think this is a work in progress, and that we'll see as we. It's so Canadian, right? It will work better in practice than it does in theory. And we're a very practical body, reviewing legislation on a regular basis, seeking to improve it, making comments, advancing. Is it perfect? No, but no process is. And can we improve? Absolutely. But I do think there's a common commitment amongst all senators of goodwill that we need to make this Senate work for Canadians, and to do that in the legislation that we review, in the Senate public bills that we advance, and in the inquiries the Senate undertakes.
We tried hard to get a Conservative senator here today because the Conservative Party, many of whom were appointed under Stephen Harper, don't like the approach that you're taking. I mean, it's, that the new system that Prime Minister Trudeau has brought in. They preferred a Senate that worked the way, as Senator Cool says, it used to, where you were all extensions of the House of Commons caucus and did the party's bidding in the Senate. Why is that, in your view, not the right way to go?
Well, I want to follow up on what Senator Eggleton said. The fathers of Confederation, and they were sadly all fathers, had a view of this chamber being complementary to the other chamber, which was an elected chamber, of being independent in exercising its judgment, of not being particularly partisan. And that characteristic is one that we want to return to, so that when we study a bill, it's not our opinion, it's our judgment that we are asked to exercise. And our judgment is a feature of deciding whether the bill has had appropriate consultation, that it is within our jurisdiction, that it is constitutionally compliant, that the stakeholders have been heard. There are various criteria senators, independent of party discipline, will apply to a particular bill. And I think that renders us more effective than having a leadership in another chamber of this Parliament determine whether or not a particular bill is worthy of support. Let's have that discussion.
Let me get Senator Pate on this. If it were the old rules and somebody had come to you and said, you know what, you'd make a good senator, we want to appoint you to the Senate, but you're going to have to join the Liberal caucus and you're going to have to sit in the Liberal government caucus, and basically, when we whip you to vote a certain way, you're going to have to do that. Would you have answered that call?
I would have answered no, and part of the reason I would have answered no is because at that time, and hopefully it'll change moving forward, but there were no parties who were taking progressive positions on social and criminal justice issues, and so the idea that you would have to vote against matters of conscience would have been incredibly problematic to someone like me. And I think it's not that there aren't many people within different parties that have different views, but in my experience, many people were fearful because of some of the perceptions of what public opinion was to take a different view. And I think this provides an opportunity to both take the views that I think need to be taken and to encourage us to really be the Canada that has promoted human rights, has promoted the values that we hold dear. And I think from everything I'm hearing, there are many people who are in agreement with that. And so I think it provides some real new opportunities.
Now, you were appointed as a big L Liberal.
Yes.
As an extension of the House of Commons caucus in some respects. So when the leader called and said, Arthur, you got to vote like this, you did. Does anybody make that call now and tell you how to vote?
It never happened that overtly. But, you go to caucuses, and I went to them for a good 15 years, both as an MP and then as a senator. And there's a certain rallying that's going on. You're trying to get behind the leader or the Prime Minister, as the case may be, part of the team. And that's very influential on how you end up voting. The last Parliament of this country was the most oppressive ever in terms of trying to review legislation. The majority from the government party continually voted, no matter what evidence came up at committees, continually voted for whatever legislation they were told needed to be passed.
And you don't do that anymore?
No, that is not done anymore. In fact, the majority of the people now, you talk about the numbers of independent senators, well, the Liberals are now independent senators as well. In fact, we voted against some government legislation in this Parliament. And that's 61 in number. That's the majority who are working on an independent basis and working quite well. We've got some good talent in the Senate now.
I just want to be clear on this. The newly appointed independent senators plus the so-called Liberal independent senators now makes up the majority of senators.
That's correct.
And you act that way.
Yes, we absolutely do. On legislation that comes before us, if we make amendments, quite frequently it's some of the independent Liberals that move those amendments and support those amendments.
Senator Cools, I have heard Senator Murray Sinclair, who's a very fine man that we all know at this table,
Splendid man.
First Nations background, of course, says that he likens the new Senate to a kind of a council of elders and would like it to take that approach to its responsibilities. How do you like that analogy?
Well, I think it's a very delicate, very loving analogy, and Murray is a great credit to the Senate, make no doubt, have no doubts about that. But I keep wanting to come back to the central point that what we do is politics. And it is a political institution, it's a parliamentary institution, but we are working from a position at all times that some of us have these thoughts very deeply and hold them very deeply, and others do not. So it's an adversarial process, and I don't see any cure or alteration for that. But I just want to say that I think we sometimes create in people's minds the fact that the Senate is a wounded place or a damaged place or somehow or the other a troubled place.
You don't see it that way?
No, not at all. The Senate is a mighty institution, and it was intended by the fathers of Confederation to last as long as Canada, the country, would last. This is why I say, and I've said often, and I've put it into articles, that to abolish the Senate is the same thing as abolishing the Confederation, because the fathers of Confederation, very clever fellows that they were, they hinged the very existence of the Senate to the existence of the country. Make no mistake about that, and that is why they arranged that however small the province was and however small its representation was in the House of Commons, it would have equal representation in the Senate as all the regions. And that was a huge issue, especially for Ontario. And remember, Ontario was a very large province, so was Quebec. And Quebec held out, absolutely. I mean, George Brown says it himself. He says Ontario was not going to go down this road unless they got rep by prop. That's the old British preoccupation.
I don't mean to take issue with you.
No. But he said, but the Quebec, he says, our Lower Canada friends were not going anywhere without equality of membership in the upper chamber. And that is the role that the Senate has performed, is that it is a bridge that holds all of these different provinces, some with different languages, some with different religions together.
I get you, but that's an argument that was first made in 1864. And my hunch is that more Canadians today are wondering what it is that you folks do that they can't do without.
I want to tell you, many studies have been done, and many times I was shown in those surveys as the public face of the Senate. I would like to say to you, to everybody here, is that as a senator, and I moved on very many large fronts on the importance of fathers in divorce, I have always found that Canadians were extremely supportive of me and supportive of these issues.
So you could champion issues as a senator that maybe you couldn't otherwise.
Absolutely, because it gives us a platform. And as Senator Eggleton would remember, we went through a period of time when every man in divorce was going through a very rough patch in life because it was the era. Anyway, what I'm trying to say to you, the Senate is a powerful institution. We have a lot of new people, and I was talking to my new colleague here earlier today. She can take the time she needs to learn what she needs to learn, because it is that kind of a place. But know that when we are in this place, we are connected to history in a very direct way. When I came to the Senate, there were senators who knew John A. Macdonald, or whose fathers knew John A. Macdonald. There were senators who walked whose grandparents or somebody walked in Laurier's funeral.
So there was that continuity.
That continuity, and that is what we have to preserve, that sense
Let me read
of
this.
Canada.
This is, I want to get Peter Harder to comment on this because he's not going to want to. So that's why.
I'll help
Here we go. This is Dale Smith, the Parliament Hill freelance journalist, author of The Unbroken Machine, who doesn't like the new system at all. He says 101 loose fish, as he calls them, cannot be an effective opposition force just as much as they cannot be a consensus body. Not that the Senate's role is consensus. Harder's attempt to delegitimize the role of partisanship in the Senate has nothing to do with trying to respect the chamber's constitutional role, which he uses revisionist history to assert, and everything to do with his own ambitions. And he's willing to slay as many straw men along the way as it takes to convince everyone that he's on the right path. Don't let him get away with it. You want to respond to Dale Smith?
Well, I haven't seen the article, but it's quite an indictment of a less partisan, more independent Senate. And my answer is the proof is in the pudding. The appointments that have been made, the conduct of senators. I don't think senators view themselves as loose fish as much as people of experience coming together around public policy issues, making judgments as to whether or not a particular course of action in a bill or a particular set of policy proposals in an inquiry are appropriate. And we have exercised that judgment. Look, in the last session in the fall, we had government bills sponsored by a Conservative senator, by Liberal senators, by independent senators, and by myself that had never happened before in terms of having all the corners of organization participate in advancing government legislation. I think that's good.
How do you, as the government's so-called point man in the Senate, get his vote or get her vote? Because you can't whip him anymore, right? So what do you do?
I have no fear or favor to offer. I have, I hope, good argument. I have good relationships. And I'm calling on, in the particular issue of the day, the exercise of their judgment. There have been occasions when Senator Eggleton has proposed an amendment in committee that I spoke against. His side won. When the bill came to the floor of the Senate, I said, now I'm the representative of the Senate to the government. And I took that bill as amended to the government and said, pay attention, the Senate has formed this view. So I'm not just a one-way street here. I have an obligation to represent the views of the Senate at the heart of cabinet government as well.
Let's talk about one of the new things that is happening as well under the new Senate rules, and that is you've got ministers of the Crown from the House of Commons coming once a week to the Senate now, not exactly for a grilling, but basically they're invited to come and answer your questions. Have you participated in one of these yet?
Yes, I have.
How did it go?
Well, it's interesting. I think it would be also interesting to have bills presented in that way by the ministers responsible, and to have the critics come and also provide their perspectives. But I mean, those are all things that and parts of the changes that are in progress and in discussion. But being one of the newest, I certainly would defer to my colleagues in terms of experience as to how that all works. I do think, as Senator Harder said, that one of the things we are already seeing is an ability of those of us who have particular experience or understanding of certain areas, an encouragement of us to share our knowledge in those areas. And I think that's incredibly helpful, and I think
well, you know,
fruitful.
question period in the Senate has become a far more civil event. Ministers come in, they're even applauded when they come in, they're applauded when they go out.
By all sides?
By all sides, and the questions are real questions. They're not just political maneuvering and a lot of heckling that goes on in the House of Commons side. It really is very deep and penetrating kind of questions that are asked by colleagues. So I think it's quite a useful thing to do to have ministers come in, because they're all in the House of Commons. None of them sit in the Senate per se, so it's useful to have it.
Well, let me do a follow-up on that, because you're, as we pointed out, you're between your time in the Senate and your time in the House of Commons, how many years are you there now?
23.
23 altogether?
Yes.
Okay, so you got recently somebody who I think had been in cabinet for 2 weeks. Karina Gould, the Minister for Democratic Institutions, she came in and participated in one of these question periods. Did you think, as a veteran Parliament Hill participant and watcher, that there was value in having her come in 2 weeks after she'd had her portfolio, asked her a bunch of questions that basically, you know, she did her best, but she didn't know the answers to?
The important thing is the process. Yeah, maybe could have waited a few more weeks to give her a chance to get used to the position, but I think she handled herself quite well. In fact, all of the cabinet ministers have, and I think they all appreciate the fact that they're being asked real questions, and they have to prepare. It's one of the things that over years we've heard from many public servants and many other people that have come to Senate committees. They say senators are prepared to ask real deep, important questions. It's not just a political game.
As opposed to
and now that
showboating.
we're out of the grip of political parties in terms of the majority of the people in the Senate, it's even better.
Senator Coles, do you think there is value in having the ministers come every week to answer your questions?
There is definite value, undoubtedly. But there was a time when any members, any MP or senator's concerns would have been answered in the context of the caucus, where the minister would respond to those things, to those questions and those concerns in a very, I wouldn't say intimate, but in a very committed way, as a person carrying a common ball, as a group, as a member of a group of the same team.
But those meetings are in private. There needs to be a public discourse as well.
But the private ones quite often are more revealing and quite often are more frank, because the reason caucus meetings are held in secret was so that there's no record to be kept, so that individuals, members could talk of the caucus, could share and exchange.
Now, how does the
without
public
worry.
benefit from that?
But that's
Only
it's
through
a
leaks.
caucus. It's,
Only through leaks.
Oh, no. Caucus served a very, very, very useful purpose, and I would like to see them strong again. But make no mistake, you could buttonhole the minister yourself very directly if it was a very fragile question, or you could pose it in the caucus.
And you think that's lost now?
I'm not convinced it's lost. Something like that eventually will come back at some point in time, where there is some kind of intimate exchange without being worried of being.
We can still contact ministers anytime and have conversations, but there needs to be accountability in public, and I think we have more accountability now than ever.
Well, we'd have to disagree on that.
Senator Hart is trying to get in.
The Senate has always been a very accountable institution, as far as I'm concerned. The Senate has a very stellar record. We have one or two little bad incidents, but the record is quite stellar.
Senator Harder.
I just wanted to make a point about a ministerial question period. We've had, so far this year, 23 individual ministerial appearances. They have all come willingly. I think they have all ended with a surprise at how quickly 40 minutes goes and how civil and informed the questions were. And I think that it's a credit to the Senate in its conduct, and it's a credit to the ministers for the preparation they have put into this. And I do think that that helps ensure an accountability. What I do wish is that they were broadcast, so that
When's that gonna happen?
the different when the Senate wills it, and we tried, and there was not unanimous consent. My hope through the Senate modernization process, we can at least ensure that when we go to the new temporary 10-year facility in the summer of 2018, that will be televised. But my point here is that as good as the Senate question period is, it would be better for the institution were that to be public.
I think broadcasting will help in that accountability. The only reason it's not being done right now is because we're about to leave the center block for restoration work that needs to be done. It's going to take a decade, and we're going to move to another facility. That other facility will be having television cameras.
But we could have done it in a temporary basis. We did it for C14 when the medical assistance and dying bill, when the ministerial appearances were televised with the consent of the chamber. When we sought consent to have the whole debate so televised, that consent was not forthcoming. I'm just on the side of the Senate being available to the public directly and unfettered through broadcast. And
You can hear the audio now, can't you?
You can hear the audio now. It doesn't give you the full appreciation. I would also make the point that Senator Eggleton has made, and that is ministers are going out of their way to find occasions to engage with senators in the committees that are relevant to them or regions that are relevant. In the last week, I can reference a number of occasions when that has happened informally across all of the aisles of the Senate, if I can put it that way, because ministers know that to advance their legislative interests, the senators have to be taken into account, and understanding where people are coming from their regions or their areas of interest
They really have to do
is really important.
They have to do a better job now convincing you to get your vote now, don't they?
Absolutely.
And is that good?
Absolutely. And frankly, it forces the minister and their staff and their departments to pay more attention to Parliament. I had a meeting with the senior staff in a large, important department, just reminding them of how and the nature of Senate accountability and how they should prepare themselves and their ministers and the legislation they present for consideration by the Senate.
Okay.
Just
one last thing on this?
that point, the resistance to broadcasting Senate debates has never come from the Senate. It has always come from the government of the day.
How come?
Because perhaps they think, perhaps, I don't know, we'd have to ask them, they think that Senate debate is more interesting than House of Commons
They don't want to
debates.
compete with you.
They didn't want the competition.
Well, here's the thing.
So, and I'm not naming any particular prime
No,
minister.
I get it, but
I
here-
can tell you, senators have been ready
I
to
wonder-
be broadcast for a
I
long time.
wonder if this is an issue. I think it's a fact that when they put television in the House of Commons and in the Ontario legislature, It did change. You know, people started hamming it up for the cameras more. There was a lot more attempt to, you know, gotcha moments in question period. Do you worry that's going to happen if you bring cameras into the Senate?
No, I think in the Senate, it will reinforce a constructive engagement, that it will reinforce the Senate as a deliberative body as opposed to the tactical partisan chamber that the House of Commons has become. And I think that difference will reflect to the good on the Senate's work and actually help us discipline our behavior.
Senator Pate.
I would agree with that. I think, in part, what most people know about the Senate in terms of its operations is through watching committee proceedings. And that is what many people will say, that they will hear, as was already discussed, deliberative discussions.
It's more thoughtful than House of
more
Commons stuff.
thoughtful
Yeah,
and
it
more
is.
complete, and it's clear that the legislation is being considered in a very thoughtful, penetrating way, and so we get a much better
Senator
situation.
Eggleton.
Well, since the committees have been raised, and they are televised, unlike the chamber itself, but committee work is also something that is vitally important and is something we can be very proud of in the Senate, particularly when we get into studies. The committee that I'm on, Social Affairs, just completed a study on dementia. Previous to that, did one on obesity. The famous Kirby reports on health and mental health were
yep.
done at our committee. There are these kind of investigative studies that are done, which is, in addition to reviewing legislation, equally important part of the Senate's function.
The Human Rights Committee is looking at prisons right now, and I think that's
Right up your alley.
That's right.
I wouldn't want to diminish any of that kind of work or give our viewers the sense that that doesn't matter. But the fact is the Senate gets covered for reasons usually other than that work, usually because somebody has behaved badly. What do you do about all that?
Nothing.
Nothing?
When I say
I don't
nothing,
agree. I don't
when
agree.
I say nothing, I mean that you correct it by your own example. So any bad things that happen, you correct by doing better as a group, as a chamber.
So he
every
wants
time.
to, Senator Harder wants to bring in a new mechanism that would have additional oversight over how you spend the public's dollars. I mean, for your own personal expenditures, that kind of thing. Is that a good idea?
No.
Wouldn't that give the public an additional feeling of comfort over what you do?
The public has all the exposure it wants to our expenses and what we and where we spend. You know, the violations have been so few, really, that it isn't even worthy. They aren't even worthy of repetition. Most senators are quite honorable lassies and lads. They really are. And I think we should move on that. We should move on that premise that people come to the institution, they take an oath, and they move ahead. And if there is a senator who acts improperly, that senator will be dealt with and has been dealt with on many occasions. But that is not the Senate.
Okay,
You
let
know,
me put a
one
new
or two bad
Let me add
things.
to that, I think a tightening of the rules was necessary, and it has happened. I agree with you that the vast majority of the senators follow the rules properly, are very careful about their spending, have been cleared by the auditor, but there are some that have, in fact, gone beyond what they should have gone. So a tightening of the rules and the observation of the rules, the advanced disclosure, the disclosure that we now do
Additional
of all of our
oversight?
spending, yes, additional oversight. I think those are all good things. They're all good things to build up public confidence in the Senate. And I think that's important.
With time running out here, let me, I want to put, well, at least a couple more items on the table here. Senator Harder, to you. One of the criticisms I'm hearing about the Senate is that, okay, you've got the technical partisanship out of it, meaning nobody gets appointed just because they're a liberal or just because they're a conservative anymore. But the kinds of people who are being appointed to the Senate are, if not big L liberals, then certainly small L liberals. They have a sort of a centrist small L liberal orientation. True or false?
Absolutely false. And the proof of that is just going over the CVs of those who are appointed. And the premise is, if you're interested in the well-being of the criminal justice system, does that make you a lefty? If you've been a bank chief executive officer, does that make you a lefty? I mean, people come with the experience they come, and more importantly, are willing to exercise the judgment in the face of the bill or the inquiry that they're engaged in through nonpartisan experience of an independent judgment that is part of being a senator.
Can you say, though, that anybody who's been appointed to the Senate under the new rules is small c conservative in orientation?
Well, I can point to senators who have been candidates for a conservative. I can point to senators who have been candidates for a New Democrat. That's not the point, though. It's that people are putting their hand up to serve as independents, are coming from a wide variety of experiences, and those experiences, when come together with those that exist in the Senate already, are helping to shape the debate in a less partisan, more independent judgment, and I think that's good.
One of the other criticisms I've heard is that somebody like Art Eggleton today could not get appointed to the Senate because he's got too much politics in his background and too much partisan politics in his background.
I welcome Senator Eggleton's appointment. I would welcome an Art Eggleton-like appointment, but I would only point out that in the last round of appointments, a mayor of a much smaller city, but nonetheless Rimouski, which is an up-and-coming city in the province of Quebec, the mayor of that city was appointed. So there's no hostility to active experience. It's just that ought not be your only criteria of appointment through that arm's length process.
Yeah, look, we need a wide variety of people in the Senate. I think we can be very proud of some of the mix we have now. The gender mix is greater than what it is in the House of Commons. It's at 43% women, and I think we're getting close to 50%. We have more Aboriginals, more people of visible minorities in the Senate than they do in the House. So we're better reflective of the population to start with. But I think we need to go farther. We need to get people of different walks of life in the Senate, and that includes people that have held elected office in past, because they bring a legislative experience that is quite valuable. So we need to have that mix that better reflects the population of this country and experiences.
Okay, in our last few minutes.
We would do well with a few former members of the House of Commons. No, they were made senators. They would be very helpful.
But I think that's the point of the criticism I've heard, is that under the new system, you're unlikely to get anybody with a lot of political experience, which might be useful, in the Senate.
Yes, well, the future is ahead. And
Truer
what
words
has
were
not
never
been
spoken.
done before can certainly be done then.
I want to know from you, in our last few minutes here, I want to know from you whether the person, was it your neighbor who said, I hate the Senate? What do you think it's going to take to get that person to revisit his or her view of the upper chamber?
Well, I think more awareness of what actually is being done in the chamber. Just my neighbors alone and my family and friends have been shocked at how much I'm working. I've always been someone who works hard. I think they thought I was going to a retirement home or something, and clearly that's not what the reality is. And the learning curve has been immense for me and for all of my new colleagues. But I think it really is people seeing more of what we're actually doing, and I think it's not just through television, it's through opportunities like this to talk about the kind of work we're doing and the kind of initiatives that are being undertaken by senators who have been there for a very long time and made a lot of contributions to those of us who are new and trying to influence and support and move things ahead in progressive ways as well.
And I wonder, Senator Harder, as well, the new system is in place because a prime minister made a decision. There's nothing in the Constitution that binds any future prime minister to the current system. In which case, how permanent do you think any of this is?
It will be as permanent as we, by our conduct, will make it. That is to say, if in the course of the next number of years, the Senate acts in a independent, less partisan, fully engaged public policy way, and the public sees the Senate as making a valuable contribution, it would be very difficult for a prime minister to say, I kind of like the idea of bagmen and failed candidates as a point of preference, and let's abolish this arm's length. It may not look like the way in which this prime minister is exercising that that appointment process, but the proof will be in Canadians writ large understanding the importance of this institution and our conduct bringing credit, not discredit, to the way we exercise our responsibilities.
Since the Conservative caucus in the Senate currently likes the way things used to be, do you know whether or not, depending on who wins their current leadership contest, whether they would put things back the way it was?
Well, that's a really good question, because if you read some of the commentary of Conservative leadership in the Senate, you would think they hadn't been there for the experience of the last Parliament in terms of the relationship between the Prime Minister's office of the day and the Senate caucus. I don't think they would wish to see a return to a command and control from the Prime Minister's office. They are enjoying, and well they should, the notion of that independence, and I would suspect that their advice to an incoming leader of the Conservative Party would be one to build on the independence and the deference and the judgment that they are bringing to the exercise of their responsibilities.
Understood. That's our time, everybody. Thank you all for coming into TVO tonight, helping us out with this. Senator Pete, I got to tell you, that's the first.
Senate is indispensable
You know what?
to the well-being of Canada.
We couldn't get rid of it if we wanted to.
You
The
got
Supreme
it.
Court's already said that.
Because the
You know what?
fathers of Confederation made sure of that. I told you they were very
I think
smart
there was a
men.
moment in the midst of that discussion where you and I actually held hands, and I don't think I've ever done that with a guest before on this program. So
Oh, well.
thank you for that.
Try it again.
That was a moment. Senator Peter Harder, the government representative in the Senate. Senator Ann Cools, independent from Toronto Centre, York. Yes. Senator Art Eggleton, Liberal, York Centre. Senator Kim Pate, a whopping 3 months on the job. There you go. Independent from Ontario. Thanks, everybody, very much for coming to TVO tonight.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.